The law also provided for the creation of the Election Assistance Commission, or EAC, the nation's first federal agency created to oversee elections at every level of government. But its mission has never been clear, and more than 15 years later, critics say the agency has succumbed to the whims of partisan operatives. Lawrence Norton, an expert in the democratic process at the Brennan Center for Justice at the New York University School of Law, says that the EAC is a necessary agency that has significantly strengthened federal guidelines for voting machine testing. At the same time, he acknowledges that its quite limited mandate from Congress means that huge swaths of our election infrastructure are left with no federal security guidelines. Even more troubling is the risk that the EAC becomes, in Norton's words, polarized by partisanship. That has become a particularly disquieting concern since the 2016 election. Russia's involvement in the 2016 contest between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump made Americans suddenly, acutely curious about how voting worked and also about how easily that process could be subverted. As time went on, the extent of Russian interference became more troubling. There were the Twitter trolls, and fake Facebook groups, but also Kremlin probes of the electoral systems of 21 states. A product of the bitter 2000 election, the EAC was fated to represent partisan divisions instead of transcending them. And the officials who run the agency have not infrequently indulged political fictions while ignoring obvious, indisputable threats. After the extent of Russian interference became clear in 2017, they could have made the case to Congress, to governors, to the American people that the EAC needed expanded powers to ensure electoral safety, just as airport security had to be radically reconfigured after the 9/11 attacks. Instead, one election expert laments, they have focused on far less significant problems. Nor was there anyone to wield either threats or inducements. From 2010 to 2014, the EAC was effectively a ghost agency, lacking commissioners and senior staff. There was not a single public meeting in 2011, 2012, 2013, or 2014. Still, Republicans fearful of Washington infringing on states' rights tried to eliminate the EAC. Representative Greg Harper, R. Mississippi, who chaired the House Administration Committee, made the first earnest effort to get rid of the agency in 2011. Harper called the EAC an agency with an increasing size and a dwindling purpose, one that has proven time and time again that what the agency knows how to do best is be reckless and irresponsible with taxpayer dollars. Harper argued that eliminating the EAC would save $33 million over 5 years, a laughably insignificant amount. The EAC survived, but it remained mired in a philosophical and political tug-of-war between Democrats and Republicans over competing claims of fraud and voter suppression. Democrats accused Republicans of weakening the Voting Rights Act, a key aspect of Lyndon B. Johnson's civil rights agenda, by implementing new restrictions on voting. Republicans, meanwhile, were installing operatives in key federal posts. Despite at least 2 years of warnings about Moscow's plans to disrupt elections in the West, it was not until the summer of 2016 that the Obama administration took the Russia threat seriously. When it comes to Russia, none of the recent U.S. administrations have covered themselves in glory, says Stephen Hall, former head of Russian operations for the Central Intelligence Agency. Colin Kahl, a former national security advisor to Vice President Joe Biden, recalled that after the president's family returned from their annual vacation on Martha's Vineyard, there were very small, high-level meetings convened by National Security Advisor Susan Rice. During those meetings, it became clear that the Russians might not just be trying to sway public opinion but were probing for ways to actually tamper with votes. Eventually, evidence of Russian probing of voter registration databases would be found in 21 states. At some point, there needed to be a public attribution of what the Russians were doing, Kahl says. But unless there was Republican buy-in to such an attribution, any such announcement would only give credence to Trump's conviction that the election was being rigged in Clinton's favor. The effort at a bipartisan condemnation of Russian efforts hit a brick wall, Kahl recalls, when it reached Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky, who just didn't believe it. Brenda Soter, a spokesperson for the EAC, disputes that characterization. It's disingenuous and inaccurate to claim that the EAC doesn't take election security threats from Russia or any other potential malicious actor, foreign or domestic, seriously, she wrote in response to questions. While it's not our responsibility to identify cyber adversaries or investigate these threats, the Commission has worked directly with DHS and the FBI to communicate such threats to election officials. Soter also points to the fact that the EAC tested and certified 6 voting systems from 4 separate manufacturers and conducted 12 training sessions across the country for election officials so they could become more familiar with information technology. She disputes the notion that the EAC has failed to provide oversight over the $380 million disbursement, noting that the agency is not able to do much more than advise states. It recently released an update on how states intend to use those funds, and plans an audit next year. It is true that Congress hamstrung the EAC from the outset. But it is also true that the EAC's commissioners dismissed the threat of Russia to the elections. McCormick's letter was a collection of talking points Republicans were using in defense of Donald Trump against the intelligence community that within weeks would be working in his service. The intelligence report McCormick dismissed had determined that Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election, and that the goal of that campaign was to denigrate Secretary Clinton and harm her electability and potential presidency. The same day, outgoing Department of Homeland Security Secretary Jeh Johnson designated the nation's 14,000 separate election systems critical infrastructure, making them eligible for federal funds. The letter caught the attention of Senator Ron Wyden, D.R., who earlier this summer sent the EAC a letter of his own consisting of 6 detailed questions about how it plans to prevent cyber attacks. Wyden wanted to know how many cybersecurity experts the EAC employed, how it ensured that the voting systems it recommended were, in fact, safe, and how it planned to test those systems. The commissioners sent back a 13-page letter that largely evaded the issues Wyden raised. They ignored several of my questions, which is unacceptable, Wyden told News Pulse News. Among the questions Wyden asked and the EAC declined to answer was whether McCormick remained a skeptic of Russian interference. The EAC's only other commissioner, Thomas Hicks, said in an interview he was confident in the measures that have been taken since 2016. Asked about electoral security, Hicks said that one of the best defenses we have is for people to serve as poll workers, Hicks said. He declined to talk about the letter McCormick had written. You should talk to her about her letters, he said. McCormick did not respond to direct requests for comment. If the EAC wasn't focused on the Russia threat, it was following the lead of the Trump administration, which was trying to switch the narrative to that of wide-scale voter fraud on Democrats' behalf. Trump at once minimized the importance of the report. Intelligence stated very strongly there was absolutely no evidence that hacking affected the election results, the president-elect tweeted the day after the intelligence report came out. The Voter Commission was dissolved several months later, without having found any evidence whatsoever of voter fraud. McCormick, for her part, remains on the EAC. Palmer, a voting official from Virginia, was involved in a 2013 voter integrity effort that critics depicted as similar to those that Kobach has undertaken in Kansas. The following year, he was behind a Republican-led effort to enforce voter identification laws in Virginia. Not all Republicans on the EAC shared McCormick's skepticism of the problem posed by Russia. After his term at the EAC ended, Commissioner Matt Masterson moved over to DHS, where he is now a cybersecurity specialist. This spring, he testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, offering an upbeat assessment: "Every state I travel to, state official I talk to, is taking this seriously." Masterson reiterated that confidence in a recent interview. "The progress made has been very real and immense," he said, noting in particular the creation of an information sharing center that he says has more than 1,000 members who come from all 50 states. The number of election infrastructure monitors who look for malicious traffic has quadrupled, and now includes 36 states and some counties. All 50 states are working with us in some way, Masterson said, even as he acknowledged a healthy skepticism from states about federal involvement. That skepticism has waned in some quarters of the GOP. The vulnerability has been exposed by the Russians in 2016, and we'd be wise to close that vulnerability in the days ahead, said Senator James Lankford, Republican of Oklahoma, in a recent interview. Lankford spent much of the spring and summer working with Senator Amy Klobuchar, Democrat of Minnesota, on a bill that would have significantly strengthened the nation's electoral systems. The bill was stalled at the urging of the White House. At a July hearing of the Senate Rules Committee, Lankford said he had absolutely zero doubt about Russian interference, but he also urged lawmakers to look beyond 2016 and, in fact, beyond 2018. Yet at that same hearing, Ted Cruz asked McCormick how seriously she took the threat of an election being directly hacked. McCormick did not seem especially worried, evincing the same confidence that Hicks had in his testimony before the 2016 election. Assessing that contest, McCormick agreed with Cruz that hacking did not alter election outcomes, an assertion that may be true but that ignores the complex, lasting damage Russia and other malefactors can, and have, caused. McCormick offered a pithy summary of the 2016 interference campaign that would not have surprised anyone familiar with her work, or with the history of the EAC, an agency compromised from the start by ideological differences.